National and Labor are putting the wheels in motion to enter talks with New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters as they vie to form the next government. Bill English reckons it could take several weeks to work out a deal with New Zealand First after National won a commanding lead over Labor in Saturday's election. But of course, MMP is about building coalitions. Labor, remember we spoke to Jacinda Ardern an hour ago at the top of the program. It hasn't given up hope of stitching together its own deal with Winston Peters, with Jacinda Ardern insisting the majority of voters want a change of government. Now, former National Prime Minister Jim Bolger negotiated the first ever MMP government with Winston Peters back in 1996. Word was at the time that a fair amount of scotch was involved during those talks.
Rumours are always abound on these types of occasions. It was really Winston myself had to do it. I mean, I said earlier in this recent campaign that to negotiate successfully, you have to respect, you have to trust the other side. You have to be able to put past differences in the past, leave them in the past, and look at what you can do together going forward. Because what you're talking about is forming a government for the future, not to relitigate the past. And there are some attitudinal barriers that have to be crossed, and that's why nobody should expect these negotiations are going to be done in a hurry. I mean, the media should relax, if we can put it that way. There's not going to be any early results. The serious negotiations won't start until the writs are in and the final numbers are known. So it's a matter of careful, patient work and the rebuilding of trust and respect.
It's really interesting to look at the discussion around the ascendancy or moral authority of the party that got the most votes. Now, people have talked about that as a convention. There is no convention. There's no constitutional convention whatsoever. But will the fact that the Nats got 10% more, let's set aside specials for the time being, be playing on Winston Peters' mind? Will that be an issue?
Well, I think it automatically gives the party with the majority votes, and this time it's a very, very clear majority for the National Party and authority. That can't be gained any other way. After all, the two parties campaigned. They both wanted that position, and one was successful, and that was the National Party. So I think that is a moral position, moral high ground for the National Party. But it's only the starting point. I mean, what both parties will be doing now is looking at each other's portfolios, looking at all the statements that were made, all the serious statements that were made, seeing where there is a common thread of interest policy-wise, and seeing where there is reasonably stark differences. And that's what we did last time. You just analyse where everybody's at, try and work a way forward, try and see an answer that meets the needs of both sides, as it were, but accept that there's always going to be give and take and compromise. Cannot be otherwise. I mean, that's what negotiations are all about. It's not one side dictating to the other. So it will take some time.
What about the areas where there are marked differences? And the most obvious one, of course, that springs to mind immediately is immigration. How do you get around such a profound philosophical and policy difference?
I'm not sure it's philosophical in the sense. It's really about the details of what are the right or wrong numbers. And given, first of all, there's no absolute number, there's no perfect number. What I think you saw during the campaign as Winston moved out into the provinces and the provincial towns and the farmers in the rural communities are actually wanting more migrants in certain areas and certain catchments because there are not enough workers there. And you can wish all you like, but a lot of people in Auckland are not going to go to provincial New Zealand and milk cows, for example. So I think the position that Winston was adopting towards the end of the campaign was far more nuanced than some might have thought at the beginning.
What advice would you give to Bill English other than relax and just take your time to get it right? What other advice?
Oh, I think Bill has shown in this campaign remarkable skills, and I believe he has more than enough nous without getting advice from me. So I'm not going to advise him. Each leader is going to negotiate slightly differently. We all have slightly different approaches, but I think what Bill English has established in this campaign is that he is a very able, competent, and I'd say shrewd leader. So I'm sure he's up to doing this job.
And what about Jacinda Ardern, who is somebody who has been in politics a much shorter time, who has never been in caucus with Winston Peters and probably has spent very little time in his company? What does she need to do?
Well, I'm probably the wrong person to be advising Jacinda Ardern. She'll be thinking about how they go forward, but she also has to, of course, negotiate with the Greens. And I know the Greens are saying that automatically they will go with Labour. And that raises, I think, a third point, if you take the totality of it. And I surmise they are now, a day or so after the election, the Greens might be quietly reflecting on whether they, unique in the world as a Green Party, should only link themselves to left-wing politics. Whereas the environment is neither left-wing or right-wing, frankly. The environment is the environment. It's Mother Earth we're talking about. And I just wonder whether or not they won't reflect on it with the national government that signed up to the Paris Climate Accord and have set in place the process to reach the goals that were set out there. So I'd imagine in a quiet back room the Greens might be saying, why? Why are we saying we can only go with one party, e.g. the Labour Party? And I'd watch that space if I was you, John.
Jim Bolger, former National Party Prime Minister, of course, who negotiated the first MMP coalition with Winston Peters and New Zealand First back in 1996, throwing the cat amongst the pigeons, I thought, at the end there.